There is not one defensive player in college football that had a bigger impact this week than Louisville star pass rusher Yasir Abdullah. We're going to break down his historic performance and more on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by Sling TV. Don't miss this week's matchup between the Louisville Cardinals and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons right here on Sling. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try it today. As always, I want to say thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Like I mentioned, there, in my opinion, is not one defensive college football player that had a bigger impact this week than Louisville star pass rusher Yasir Abdullah. We're going to talk about his performance, also how the Louisville defense came in clutch. And then finally, we'll kind of break it down a little bit more and focus on, well, what does this do for the season moving forward for the Louisville Cardinals? We'll talk about all those points here in just a second. We'll start out with Yasir Abdullah. Abdullah has been, I wouldn't say quiet this season. Last year he had 10 sacks. Coming into the second half of the season, I should say, he only had 2.5. So, it could be argued that maybe he wasn't necessarily having as good of a season as he was last year, although I think that he's doing a lot of things extremely well, so I wouldn't look too much into that. But there is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the fact that there was no defensive college football player in the country this week that had more of an impact on a game than Yasir Abdullah had against the Pittsburgh Panthers in the win 24-10 on Saturday evening, homecoming weekend. Yasir Abdullah had 7 total tackles, led the Cardinals, or was tied for the lead, 7 tackles, along with Momo Sinogo. 4 of those were solo tackles. He had 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, 2 pass deflections, 3 quarterback hurries, but the big things to focus on was the interception at the goal line and the forced fumble that ultimately led to the scoop and score that put the Cardinals up 14 and essentially put the game out of reach late in the fourth quarter. And you can say that, as crazy as it sounds, the impact that he had spans beyond the stat sheet. I think it seemed like every other play, he was either disrupting the opposing backfield, he was getting after Kedon Slovis, he was getting involved in the rushing game, defending passes. You see the pass deflections, but I mean, I think this is for sure, without a doubt, the best game that we have seen Yasir Abdullah play as a Louisville Cardinal. I don't necessarily think that that is far-fetched to say at all. Statistically, it speaks for itself. If you try to argue that another player had better statistics on the defensive side of the ball this week in college football, you might be able to make that case. To be honest, I may be a little ignorant in terms of statistics across the country, so I can't follow every single game. But I will say that if you go back and you watch that game from Saturday evening and you just pay attention to Yasir Abdullah, I mean, it's incredible how involved he was defensively from start to finish. I mean, sure, he necessarily might have made a mistake here or there, but who doesn't? I mean, you can break down any performance and really claim that a player makes a mistake. But, man, what a job well done for Yasir Abdullah. From a pass rushing situation, I mean, like you said, you saw the sack. Could have been more, had 3 quarterback hurries, and then had 2 tackles for loss. So as involved as he was getting after the quarterback, he was also doing a good job of becoming just a complete game changer at the line of scrimmage. And you could definitely tell that Yasir Abdullah, even when he wasn't recording a sack in the stat sheet or a tackle or whatever may have you, you could tell that Pittsburgh's offense didn't really have an answer for him. And it made it tough. I mean, you could just tell when a player has an effect on a game, it affects how the offensive line plays. It affects how the quarterback operates. Louisville as a whole had, I believe, 6 sacks. Actually, no, 2 sacks. I apologize. 6 tackles for losses, I should say, in 7 quarterback hurries. The Cardinals continue to be one of the most defensive or one of the most disruptive defensive teams in the opposing backfield. We'll get to that here in a second. But, man, I just went back and watched that game yesterday, and I was just even more impressed than I was the day before, because when you go back and you focus on the individual performance, it was incredible. Another thing, Yasir Abdullah being the size that he is, I think he's around 6'1", 6'2", but 240 pounds. For him to go step by step with a wide receiver on the out route, and I think Jalen Smith was the one who kind of made me start to think about it, because he basically said, people don't understand how impressive it is and special it is for a 6'2", 245-pound edge rushing linebacker to go step by step with a wide receiver and make that interception. I mean, that is a huge, huge play. It was one of many clutch defensive plays that Louisville made inside their own territory, but obviously the big play was the strip sack. Kedon Slovis had the ball around midfield. The Pittsburgh offense down by 7, looking to try to extend the game, find the end zone tied up, and force it to overtime. Hopefully, was in the mind of Pat Narduzzi, Kedon Slovis, and the rest of the Pittsburgh offense. But Yasir Abdullah had different plans, beat his man off the edge, and was able to swipe the football before the hand motion was going forward from Slovis, and it was an easy scoop and score for the Louisville Cardinals. So that play in itself, I think in past years, Louisville's been very much improved, right, from this year, this year in response to or in relation to the years prior, in the way that they are causing turnovers, but they've had some struggles on capitalizing. They forced 3 turnovers in the first half and didn't necessarily get anything out of it. I don't necessarily think they turned any of those to points. Now, granted, they were all deep inside their own territory, but still they weren't able to put any points on the board. The fact that they were able to capitalize off of this turnover, and especially coming in the situation in which it did, it really capped off a solid defensive performance from the Louisville Cardinals, holding Pittsburgh to only 10 points. But I think that I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying that Yasir Abdullah deserves more attention from the fan base, because I don't think that that's the case at all. I think Louisville fans know that Yasir Abdullah is a star, that we are very lucky to have him on our defense, that he's been very good for us the past handful of seasons. But he decided to come back this year. And all season long, and, the tone from Yasir Abdullah has stayed the same. It's all about the team. It's all about the guys around him. The personal recognition always kind of gets deflected in favor of the team success and just being here for the team. Yasir Abdullah could have gone to the NFL last year, decides to come back and try to improve draft stock, try to win more games, and maybe doesn't necessarily statistically jump off the page in the first 6 games. This is such a fitting game for Yasir Abdullah, because, the first couple of weeks, maybe he didn't necessarily play to the level in which he felt like he could have. And now we see him play his best game that he's had as a Louisville Cardinal, one of the better defensive performances in Louisville program history. I think that is definitely well within a reason to claim. And Mike Rutherford, Card Chronicle on Twitter, said it best. Is this the best defensive individual performance since Jair in 2016 against Clemson, where he had multiple interceptions? And I think that's a very good point. So, like I said, not necessarily underrated with the fan base, and maybe even not the ACC. I think the ACC, he still gets a good amount of credit, but I think that the national media needs to be talking more about Yasir Abdullah. Definitely should win ACC Linebacker and Defensive Player of the Week award, and maybe National Defensive Player of the Week award as well. Maybe there's somebody with better statistics out there from this past week. I don't know. I can't follow every single game and look through all the statistics, but I would argue that there's no one that made a bigger impact on a certain game than Abdullah did for this game. And we're talking about, wiping away a possible 7 points with that interception at the goal line, multiple quarterback hurries, a sack, tackles for loss, solid in the run game, and then the game-changing, I would say, game icing, because, Pittsburgh was down 14 with 3 minutes to go at that point, and just a huge clutch play that capped off a brilliant individual performance. So hats off to Yasir. It definitely could have happened for anyone better. I think he truly deserved this. He's been very unapologetically all about his team, all about this university. He's been an extremely, solid ambassador for this program and for this city as well. Definitely a fan favorite, a big asset in the community as well when it comes to promoting this program, promoting this city. Has done a phenomenal job, and I could not be more happy for a guy, because I think that he truly deserves it. And I'm extremely excited to see how he can use this performance to hopefully have some more performances, maybe not obviously like this to a T, but a possible same impact where he just becomes an absolute phenom for the rest of the season and really improves his draft stock and helps the Louisville Cardinals along the way. So great performance from Yasir Abdullah. I would argue that no defensive player in college football had a bigger impact, but it was the cherry on top for a very solid Louisville defensive performance that for the second time this season, won the Louisville Cardinals a game. They are one win closer to bowl eligibility. We're going to talk a little bit more about that defensive performance here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Nissan. This week's thrilling moment in college football is brought to you by Nissan. The thrilling designs behind the new lineup from Nissan are intended to empower drivers in vehicles as capable as the driver themselves. When I think of unbelievable abilities on the field for this week's thrilling moment, it obviously has to be Yasir Abdullah's forced fumble that led to a scoop and score that put the Louisville Cardinals over the Pittsburgh Panthers 24-10 on Saturday evening, got them one win closer to bowl eligibility. This segment has been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you in the all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today. Available now at nissanusa.com. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So moving right on along, talking about the Louisville defense as a whole, we discussed Yasir Abdullah's individual performance, I should say. But the defense as a whole, I think, did a fantastic job here. Now, granted, Pittsburgh, they were solid. I mean, they had 326 yards of offense, which doesn't necessarily kind of live up to what they usually do. They threw for 158 yards, so the same key to the game that I talked about on Friday, and that was make life tough for Kedon Slovis as a passer and force him into some tough situations. Pittsburgh was 4 of 11 on third down, 0 of 2 on fourth down, averaged 5.5 yards per pass, and Slovis threw 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. On the ground, it is what it is. Israel Abanikanda had 28 carries for 129 yards and a touchdown. Overall, Pittsburgh 168 yards on the ground. And obviously, Abanikanda's 12-yard touchdown run proved to be the only touchdown that Pittsburgh would score. That was early in the first quarter. They kicked a field goal in the third, but really that this was kind of a big defensive slugfest. Pittsburgh came into the matchup with a very solid defense. One of the teams that has had the most sacks in the NCAA, top 15. Solid defensive line. Malik Cunningham, Keaton Slovis, both players really couldn't get much going for their respective offenses. Louisville's defense, for the second time this season, along with the win at Central Florida, came up big and really, really did their part, did what they had to do. Like I mentioned, had 2 sacks on the evening, maybe not necessarily as notable in the pass rushing category as they have been in weeks past, but still 2 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, 4 pass deflections, 7 quarterback hurries, and 1 defensive touchdown. Obviously, they ended up forcing, I believe it was 4 turnovers. I do want to think, yes, 4 turnovers to 1. So Louisville comfortably won the turnover category. Malik Cunningham with the lone Cardinals interception. But the Louisville defense did what they had to do. It wasn't pretty at times. I know defensive coordinator or co-defensive coordinator Brian Brown said in his press conference this week, or I think it was this past week, that they said basically, we'll give up yards. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing this, obviously, but we'll give up yards as long as it means not giving up points. And that's their main focus, is not giving up points. And however you feel about that or not, however you feel about that statement, because I know some people look at it and they think, oh, well, that makes sense. And there's some people that's like, why not do both? But so I get both sides of the argument, but you can't argue that Louisville bent but did not break a lot on Saturday evening. Keaton Slovis had 2 interceptions. Both of those came pretty much near the goal line. I think at like the 1-yard line. The fumble, I think, was pretty significantly far in Louisville territory as well. So that's something to focus on. So Louisville's defense, when Pittsburgh was in the red zone in Louisville territory, they bent but did not break. They forced turnovers and they clutched up. And that's what we've been looking for the past 3 seasons since Scott Satterfield took over. I'm really, really impressed by how balanced of an attack that the Louisville defense had, how many guys got into the action. Momo Sanogo had 7 tackles. Ben Perry had 6 and 2 quarterback hurries. Monty Montgomery had a half a sack, half a tackle for loss, 5 tackles. Yaya Diaby with 5, 2.5 tackles for loss. Mason Rieger, 5. Quincy Riley, 4. MJ Griffin had 4 and an interception. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. had 3. Minkins had 3. Dorian Jones with 3. Ashton Gelati with 3. Kei'Trel Clark with 2. Chandler Jones, TJ Quinn, Popeye Williams, Marvin Dallas, Braden Smith, Jared Dawson, Tawfiq Thomas, and Trey Franklin, all with 1. Actually, Franklin, I don't think he had a pass deflection. He did not have a tackle, but the rest of those had 1 tackle. Obviously, Braden Smith's tackle was on the interception, but big performance from this Louisville defense, one that is encouraging. I know Pittsburgh's offense is not the most high octane out there, especially not in the ACC, but they're a very solid rushing team. They did a solid job of maybe not necessarily truly shutting down the rush, but they kept it respectable and allowed 160-something yards, which might not necessarily be the greatest, but you factor in that they also held Pittsburgh to under 160 yards passing, didn't allow a touchdown outside of the first quarter, and forced 4 turnovers. And that's a very, very big performance from this Louisville defense, one that hopefully they can build upon going up against one of, if not the best offense in the ACC, and that is the Wake Forest Demon Deacons led by Sam Hartman. So definitely a performance to build on. So, but looking forward in terms of this game, what does this result do for the Louisville Cardinals? What does it, what's the significance behind it? What now? Right? Those are the questions to be asked, and we're going to answer those here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Sweat Block. Now, granted, I've told you all many times I'm a big recreational basketball player, and that is definitely the case, especially in the wintertime when my day job starts to dwindle down a little bit. But seemingly I'm starting to sweat more than I was when, I was in high school or even in college. And Sweat Block has been a game changer. It's something that you apply the night before, and it keeps you dry all day long. It was created by a doctor to help with his own excessive sweating. It's doctor created, obviously, but also doctor recommended. You can get it on Amazon. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweat Block. Save 20% with the promo code Locked On. That's 2 words, Locked On, at sweatblock.com. So yeah, let's kind of transition over into the general discussion of things. What does this win do for the Louisville Cardinals? Well, I said on Thursday that a win for the Louisville Cardinals would be nice. It's one win closer to bowl eligibility. You're 4-3 now. The first time that you've been over 500 all season long, I do believe, and it's a solid momentum building win. You've won a toss-up game, a game where Pittsburgh, a lot of people had them predicted to win this game. I did as well. The Cardinals came into the matchup a game time. I think it was as a 1-point favorite, and it wasn't a pretty game. There are some things that need to be improved on, some concerns here and there, but ultimately a win is a win is a win. I'd rather have an ugly win rather than a pretty loss. You can argue that there's no such thing as a pretty loss. So, yeah, I think that from a momentum standpoint, I think that that's the big thing here is the possible momentum building. The first time that Louisville has beaten 2 FBS teams in back-to-back weeks, or I think Power 5 teams in back-to-back weeks since 2019, if I read that right. It was a solid victory. This is a good victory for Louisville. Pittsburgh was a solid team. You're now 4-3, 1 win closer to bowl eligibility. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't want to overanalyze it, but I also don't want to undersell it. There's a fine line. I don't want to be a sunshine pumper, but I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. So, and I think that there's a very fine line. So, positively speaking, to kind of recap, a win is a win. You're 1 win closer to bowl eligibility. You beat a team that, this was a toss-up game. A lot of people didn't have you winning this game. And that's definitely a benefit. And your defense looked good doing it. Offensively had some struggles. We'll talk about those tomorrow. But overall, I think that it can be said that you're 1 win closer to bowl eligibility. You have the opportunity to gain some momentum. You're on a 2-game winning streak now, going into a very, very tough matchup next weekend at home, 3:30 kickoff time against the, I think, 11th or 13th ranked Wake Forest Demon Deacons. That's going to be a tough matchup. And you have the opportunity to get that much closer to bowl eligibility. So you've got some momentum now. That's solid. You build up the confidence. But to address the other side of things, you still have to handle business. Just because you beat Pittsburgh doesn't mean that all of your problems go away, because you still do have the opportunity to get to bowl eligibility, but it's not going to be an easy road. You have, currently speaking, I think 4 out of the 5 teams that you still have to play are currently ranked, I believe. So it goes without saying that you still have to handle business. You have to have some short-term memory when it comes to a long season. Yes, you can relish the victory for the time being, but hey, it's back to work. And I don't think you have to tell these players that. I mean, I feel like they know that. But I think that it has to be focused on to where you can't look at this and think, oh, you beat a team that maybe you weren't supposed to beat, or if you were supposed to beat, it was going to be a very close game, and you finally did that for the first time this season. Okay. Good job. You deserve a round of applause. I really do think that Louisville's team deserves a round of applause for their performance. They played solid. Are there some things that need to be cleaned up? Sure. But a win is a win, especially a double-digit win where you held Pittsburgh to 10 points. Not only that, but you had some big-time recruits on campus. That's something that, winning helps recruiting. I think they go hand in hand, right? So, put it this way. I don't think anybody wants to see Louisville go by the wayside here and lose out. If you do, just because you want Scott Satterfield fired, I respect your opinion. I respect your beliefs and your thoughts, but I just don't agree with that. I think that cheering against your team I just don't, that's not me. That's not my style. I would love to see Scott Satterfield and the Louisville Cardinals get to 6 and 7 wins. Does Scott Satterfield come back at 6 and 6? That's a conversation to be had. Does he come back at 7 and 5? Damn right he does, in my opinion. And I hope that he gets to 7 and 5, because that would then lead us to know that if you get to 7-5, you're 4-3, you win 3 out of the next 5 games. That means that you're doing something right, and you've made some changes because you don't just luck in to 3 wins in the next 5 games. You don't. It's just not going to happen with the rest of the schedule. So, like I said, I think that the takeaway, the answer to the question, what does this mean for Louisville? It's a momentum builder. It's solid for recruiting. It is another win closer to bowl eligibility, but still things to clean up, especially on the offensive end. Some questions that need to be answered, some concerns that need to be addressed. But I think that this is a solid win, marked by a historic individual performance from Yasir Abdullah and a great performance from the Louisville defense. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the struggles offensively that we saw against Pittsburgh. There also will probably be some football recruiting talk, so just be sure to check into that. I want to say thank you all once again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, check out Locked On Sports Today, also available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcast. But that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone, have a great day. Have a great start to your week. Go Cards. We'll see you right back here